Hello everyone. Welcome to this session of our NPTEL course, Appreciating Linguistics or Typological Approach. So now, since we are trying to figure out what are the different kinds of, like, because you remember the study or the discussion should start from the understanding or the acquisition of antonyms. So with this information or the semantic overextension information, let's try to find out how do the children they acquire the meaning of antonyms. Now, since we realize that the overextension is not random, rather they follow a particular pattern. So, our concern is that how to identify, like how to find out the acquisition pattern of antonyms in English. And these are the 3 points. Look at the slides. These are the 3 points that have been emerged as the study done by Moravcsik. Please refer to the book Introducing Language Typology. So, what are the points? The first point is that in acquiring antonyms, children frequently overextend the meaning of one of the two terms. The frequency or the statistics says that when the child is acquiring antonyms in English, very frequently the overextension of the meaning happens at least one of the two terms, if not. So, either let us say if the word is x and the antonym is y, then the child is going to extend either the meaning of x or the meaning of y. So, this is like this. Maybe I will draw a small box here. This is word, this is antonym. Okay. Let us say this is dark and this is light. So, when the child is acquiring the antonym of dark, following the first point, what it will be? So, either the meaning of dark would be overextended or the meaning of light would be overextended. One of these things is going to happen. Either of the two, either the word or the antonym, that is going to be the meaning is going to be extension. That is one claim. Let us see how the claims have been taken into account. And then the second claim, overextension is consistently unidirectional across examples and across subjects. So, this overextension, it has been unidirectional. So, if the child is going to overextend any of these semantics, it does not approach it from the other way around. If the dark has been overextended, it will always be, it will never be coming from the other side, it is always unidirectional. And if there is an asymmetry between the two terms, it is not entirely due to the differential frequency of the use of the terms in the ambient language. So, that means when the child is trying to understand two terms, this sounds to be a little clumsy if you read, but then let me explain it to make you let it sound simple, is that the asymmetry between the two terms, let us say dark and light, obviously there is an asymmetry between these two, which is why these are opposite to each other, these are antonyms to each other. For a child, this asymmetry is not entirely due to the differential frequency of the use. That means, it is not related to how dark is used in the discourse or how light is used in the discourse. Rather, it depends what kind of ambient language that it has or that hosts these two terms. So, instead of focusing on the frequency, the child has to find out the semantic overextension. So, now let us try to make it let us take up these issues one by one, so that we can understand how a child acquires the antonym, right. So, what are we going to do now? The 3 points that I have mentioned just now. One is related to the overextension, which is the point 1. The children, they frequently overextend the meaning, and then the second one is it is related to the asymmetry of overextension. It is always unidirectional. Okay. So, that is what we have to talk about. And then the third one, the unidirectionalness of the semantic overextension, and finally, we will talk about how does the effect of frequency sort of how does the effect of frequency impact the meaning or the antonym acquisition process in case of the children. Okay. So, let us start it from the overextension. So, a lot of researches have been done, and the researchers have noted that in the course of acquiring the meaning of antonyms, mainly the English speaking children, they learn to understand and use one of the two terms before they understand and use the other. So, that means if it is dark and light, so the child does not acquire both at a time. The child acquires dark first, then tries to find out the antonym of dark, which is light, or she will first acquire light and then eventually she will get to know that the antonym of light is dark. So, it never happens that the child is acquiring both the things at the same time. So, one example that Clark study would talk about is the word like after. So, before and after. Okay. So, before is the word which has been which has been acquired before the word after, right. So, if it is before and after, which one has come first? Before has come first, and after has been used later, right. And similar is the case with tall and short, big and small. So, the other antonymic pairs, something like this, in this case also one of the two terms is privileged. Sometimes tall would be privileged than short, or big would be privileged from small, but the child never gives equal importance to both the pairs at the same time, does not work in that way. The child has to acquire one of these two first, and then in the due course she will acquire the other one. Okay. So, that is what happens because of this sort of an acquisition process. So, what happens, the first word which has been acquired by the child, the meaning then extended to the other term. So, that means if we say big and small, let us say the child has acquired big first. So, the semantic extension of big would cover a lot. Let us say an elephant is going to be the extended form because it is big. So, when the child acquires small, the child already has this thing in mind that small is anything but big, right. So, the acquisition of small is related to the acquisition of big. So, the concept of small has to be anything but big. So, that is why this is considered to be a one way or the unidirectional process, and because of this semantic overextension we see there is an asymmetry. So, that means when the child is acquiring the pair, it's not that both the things are happening simultaneously or the overextension has been uniform, not really. The term that refers to the larger extension is generalized to the other one. Let us say big, which has a larger extension, and this larger extension has been generalized to the other, right. So, let us maybe I will give you an example to understand the asymmetry of overextension. When you say more means something additional, okay, and what is the opposite of more? It is going to be less. So, when the child is acquiring more, this has been adapted by less, but more is not used to mean less. That means less would be anything but more, short would be anything but tall. So, that is why the semantic overextension are asymmetric. We cannot really say which one has been acquired first, which one has been acquired later, and let us say all children are going to acquire tall first, short later, not really. There is no symmetric relation between this. Anything might be, or anything might be acquired at any point of time for the human children. So, now the concern is what should be the reason for this kind of an asymmetry. So, the first point, semantic overextension, we see that the children would learn or acquire word meanings by associating the general semantic properties of the word before getting more specific ones. So, we agree with that. First the general property, then we think about the specific ones, and eventually they would go for the antonym. So, not like if there is there is a pair of words, and out of these pair one would be more privileged, the other one would be less privileged. The more privileged one is going to be acquired first and the less privileged one is going to be acquired later. So, and when you are talking about overextension, it's the more privileged one which has a which has been overextended and that gets generalized to its antonym. That means, if the word X has certain features, the antonym of X will not have the features which X has. It has to be anything but X. So, now we realize that there is an asymmetry, and what kind of asymmetry, and why is it always unidirectional. So, then the observation here is that across all the pairs of antonyms, the direction of the overextension has been uniform. It is always the meaning of the term that refers to the larger extension. So, if there is a particular word which the child can associate with more terms, that is what is going to be acquired more. Let us say big and small. Apparently, big can have more extensions. Okay? And what kind of extensions? Semantic overextensions. Because of the frequency or because of the chances of having broader semantic overextensions, big seems to be acquired first and small seems to be acquired later. Similar is the case with more and less. More seems to have broader semantic overextension. Less seems to have less or smaller or less wide semantic overextension. That is why the child tends to learn more first and less later. The child tends to learn tall first and short later. However, this asymmetry, there must be, so what to understand, what sort of question should we ask, is that the semantic overextensions are asymmetric and it is consistently done by favoring always the term expressing the larger extension. The term which has bigger extensions or bigger extension will be acquired first, would be more privileged. The one which has less wide extension is going to be less privileged and the frequency is also going to be less. So, now the question, the third question that we need to ask is that what could be the possible reason for such kind of asymmetry. First there is extension, then there is asymmetry. The third question that we need to address is what are the reasons of such kind of asymmetry. So, this kind of asymmetric patterns of overextension are also documented in other aspects of child language. Let us say, for example, morphology. Okay? For this, I would ask you to think about the verbs, the regularized past tense verbs. When it is jump, the past tense is jumped, right? That is a regularized verb. When it is let us say when it is laugh, it is going to be laughed. But a lot of children, they would use it as comed, C-O-M-E-D. So, instead of saying came, they would say comed. Instead of saying went, they would say goed, right? And similar is the case with the plural forms. Sheep, which is generally it does not take the plural s marking, children are going to, or children that tend to use the term sheeps, which is unacceptable, ungrammatical. Okay? And this is what we call overgeneralization. So, this overgeneralization of certain words, that gives us an idea that morphological extensions are very common among the children. So, any time they think about the past tense, they are going to associate the ed thing. Any time they think about the plural morphological representation, they are going to add the r, right. So, Dan Slobin has actually done a wonderful study on this, and he provides quite a rich evidence, especially in Polish. So, in Polish language, for the feminine gender, the plural marking is 0 for genitive cases, and for the neutral nouns, the plural masculine genitive would have would have a suffix ov. So, for masculine there is a marker, for feminine it is 0, right. So, that is how Polish plural works. But when the children they acquire the language, Polish for that matter, they tend to mess up with most of the overgeneralization stories. So, what do? They the children they overuse the regular forms at the expense of the irregular ones. So, the irregular ones they also get overshadowed by the regular forms. So, if you talk about English, the children would say instead of saying feet they would say foots, instead of saying sheep they would say sheeps. So, all this kind of, and that is also the same story in case of Polish. So, in a language like Polish also, since there is a gender difference in most of the children's speech, you do not really find it. In English, though there are certain irregular verbs which do not take the ed marker, and there are certain plural nouns which do not take s marker, the children seem to do it quite frequently. So, now what should be our concern? The concern here is that if we look at the frequency, if we check the frequency of use in the ambient language, and if we consider it as a factor, and what is a factor? The frequency of occurrence. If that is a factor to explain the asymmetry of overextension, then probably such kind of an explanation would apply to the semantic overextensions, because the more frequent is the phrase, larger extension does it have in morphological system. So, the extension would be larger in case of in case of more frequency. In other words, greater frequency of the positive antonym would cause its meaning to be extended to the negative pole. So, if the positive meaning is overextended, it is going to also affect the negative meaning of it or the negative pole of it. So, what happens in this case? So, as far as antonymic pairs are concerned, when the child is acquiring this language, a couple of things that you need to remember. Okay? So, and these things would be put in the generalization format as we do for the other linguistic or the other kind of language phenomena. So, just like we did it for the diachronic study of articles and word orders, here also we will see what sort of generalization can be done to identify the cross linguistic pattern in the child's language at the developmental stage. We will go back to the initial stage, intermediate stage, and then the final stage. So, what happens in the initial stage? Let us look at Gen 4. So, Gen 4, the initial stage is that the children do not understand or use either member of an antonymous pair. So, they do not understand either of this, they try to overextend as much as possible. So, the first thing if it is big and small, they do not understand what does big mean, what does small mean, whether they have any relation or not. So, to begin with they do not have any idea. So, then what happens in the intermediate stage? In the intermediate stage they refer to the greater extension which has been acquired, and the positive term has not yet been. So, that means, so they started without any understanding of any of the pairs, let us say big and small. The children do not know what is the meaning of big, what is the meaning of small. So, that is the initial stage. Intermediate stage, they tried to or they referred to the greater extension. The word which has more wide extension is going to be learned, is going to be acquired faster. The one which has less wide frequency or less wide extension is going to be acquired later. So, that is the intermediate stage. So, look at the intermediate stages and the 2 points associated with that. So, first, if there is a term that refers to greater extension, then it has been acquired first and the opposite will come later. And when the child has acquired both, let us say first the wider extension based term has come, then the antonym has also come in the due course of time. Now, the child has both the words in the inventory. What happens? Both the terms they are both the terms are used, but one refers to the smaller extension, the other one refers to the bigger extension. The bigger extension one has been the primary word, and the smaller extension word is the word which has been acquired later, right. So, that means the smaller extension is generally used in the sense of the other term. Let us say to understand small, the child has to understand big first, because big has a bigger extension. The child has understood the semantic components of big. Now, when the child understands small, she would get an idea that small is anything but big, right. If that can be done, then that would be considered as the intermediate stage. And what happens at the final stage? Now, the child has understood both big and small. So, both the terms are understood, and it is used in the ambient language. So, the language which the child is acquiring, so she can use it comfortably. Now, let us try to put it in a summarized fashion. First, we have to think about the initial stage. What is the initial stage? The child does not understand anything and does not know how to use either member of an antonymous pair. Intermediate stage, the child got to know about the privileged one first. And which one is the privileged? The privileged one has the greater extension. So, that has been acquired first, and the opposite term has not come yet. The opposite term will come later when the child understands that the opposite term is anything but the root word, or anything but the primary word. So, that is the intermediate stage. So, first came the word which has more generic extension, then came the word which has less generic extension. So, that is the intermediate, and final stage, the child has understood both the terms, and the child has the ability to use it comfortably in the ambient language. So, that is about the typological generalization in the child's development stage. Okay? Yeah. So, now since we got to know these are the three, like the initial stage, then the intermediate stage, and then the final stage, what sort of implication does it have to understand the language acquisition process as far as antonyms are concerned? So, how do then the question is, how do the children acquire the antonym, and what sort of things have an impact or an effect from the environment, let us say the linguistic environment. So, the indication here is that the children, they acquire antonyms, and the effect of the linguistic environment is definitely crucial. It does play a vital role, but there is also an indication that the children have innate biases. So, that is the reason why when you are thinking about the opposites, they can sometimes figure out that the opposite of big is small. Nobody really teaches them that, okay, listen, small has all these components that big does not have, right. So, besides the linguistic environment, which surely plays a vital role, the children also have innate biases, by which cross linguistically it has been proven, or cross linguistically it has been identified that the acquisition of antonyms, most probably that remains same for all the languages. So, both the forces, they play equal role, the linguistic environment as well as the innateness, like the innate biases, right. So, though this study has been done primarily in English, but it seems to have cross linguistic effects, right. So, now the question is here, what is the initial stage and what has been the final stage? The initial stage, there was no idea about any of the antonymous pairs. The final stage is that the child is able to use both of them, both the words with equal efficiency, or with equal let us say subtle ability, or you can say both the words have been used properly as per the semantic extension of the words that they are, right. So, what should we understand from this process is that so there is something called nature versus nurture. So, when you say, so this is what I will write here. Okay. So, this is something I want you to remember after you get to know about the generalization. One is nature versus nurture. Okay. So, in this nature versus nurture, that is the initial stage versus the final stage maybe, or primarily the initial stage, the most convincing way of the effect of the ambient language on the acquisition process is that you have to take the languages that differ in a particular way. Otherwise, the acquisition process is not that easy to compare and contrast, right. So, let us consider the language acquisition of Hindi and language acquisition of English. They are two different languages with different word order belonging to two different families. So, when you try or when you study the grammatical patterns that the child has been following or the child has in her speech, and when you find out the errors in the child's speech as far as the grammaticality or acceptability is concerned, you can actually understand or the cross linguistic pattern. So, you may not have to study all the languages or you may not have to study the linguistic behavior of children of all the languages in the world, but at least if you compare different languages from different families, at least some of them, you would get an overall idea that cross linguistically this could be a pattern. So, what are the two things which are affecting? One is the linguistic environment that has an impact on it, also the innate biases. Both the things they work simultaneously and they help the child acquire language acquire antonyms in case of children. Okay. So, that is about the acquisition story, and then maybe we can move to the spatial terms, right. So, how the space or the terms related to, I will just briefly talk about it, I am not going to discuss it in more detail. So, what I will do, I will just give you an idea how the spatial terms are acquired by children. Okay. Let us say, and when I say this is mainly, I am going to write it over here, acquisition of spatial terms related to space. Okay. So, if it is related to space, then we need to find out the words like close, far, near, what are the other spatial terms? Let us say up, down, beneath. So, the words like that. So, what are the different ways by which the children acquire this kind of space related words? Okay, the space related words, they seem to be intuitively acquired, right. In considering they know one, like let's say they are standing here. So, you have to find out when it is related to close, far, up, down. Intuitively these are obvious. When you say close, that means the child would feel that it is near. When you say far, the child would definitely get an idea that it is going to be a little far from where she is standing, right. But in most of the languages, like semantically it should be obvious and it should be easy to understand, but the languages which are not genetically, even the genetically related languages, they also show surprising differences as far as the spatial or the space related terminologies are concerned. For this, I would ask you to look at the Korean data that we have here. What is it? Look at the data number. I do not have the data number here, but then just look at the slides. And here we have, let us say, one of the differences that has been highlighted through this data is that there is, what does it mean? Look at the data, look at the example, put the apple in a bowl, right. So, when you say put the apple in a bowl, so that means putting an apple into the bowl, right, and it requires the verb nehta, so that is in Korean. So, when you say putting a cup on the table, it requires a different word. So, one is, look at the data A, it has the data A has nihita. Nihita means putting it where? Putting it in the bowl or into a bowl. When the verb is nohata, it means putting the cup on the table. So, there are even in the same language, on the table and in the bowl, not only the prepositions are different, but also the verb form is different. So, that is an interesting, or Korean is an interesting example. Ideally, it should be complicated for the child to acquire, more complicated, because not only the preposition, not only the adposition changes, it also changes the verb. It does not happen in the same way in English. Let us say, in English, it is always put the table in a bowl or put the cup on the table. So, what is difference? The difference here is the spatial marker or the space marker, that is in or on. But in case of Korean, it is not only the adposition difference is there, but also there is a verbal difference. So, that is the reason why Korean data is interesting. So, what happens in these situations, the objects have a loose contact with each other. Why the objects have a loose contact? Because the postposition changes, the verb also changes, right. But if you look at, let us say there is another set of data, let us go to the other set of data that we have. Okay. I do not think I have it here. Okay. All right. So, in both the situations, what happens, as I just mentioned, the objects have a loose contact with each other, right. But there is a close fit between the two objects, and the opposition, like the containment between the two objects or the support between the two objects, it has been suspended, because the verb is same, keeping or putting that. The verb in English, the semantic interpretation is same, but because of the spatial reference or the space reference, this has been different. But on the other hand, we have another set of Korea data. I have not written it here, but maybe for your reference. So, now what I am going to show, the first set of data that we have seen so far in Korean, where not only there is a difference in the space indicating phrase, but also there is a difference in the usage of the verb. So, when you are putting the apple in the bowl, the verb is nehta, and when you are putting the cup on the table, the verb is nohta, right. But in the same language, look at the example given written in the red ink. So, the 2A in this case, put the cassette in the box and put the lid on the jar. Okay. So, the cassette and then the lid, in both the cases you see the verb is same, it is kkita, I do not know how the Koreans would read it, but it is kita or whatever, there is no change in the verb. So, what is the difference? The only difference is the space indicating phrase. So, why in the first set of example the verb is different, but in the second set of example the verb is same? Because of what? The close fit between the two objects. In the first, the first object is apple, the second object is cup. There is no semantic relation between these two. So, the apple is a fruit and the cup is like a container. So, the child, if the child has got to acquire such things, it is difficult semantically also, there has not been much connection. But in case of the cassette and the lid, both are inanimate and both have certain kind of semantic connection between the two, and there is a containment, okay. And this verb, so that is why the verb remains same. The same verb can be used both for placing an object into something or onto something. So, the meaning of these two, when you are talking about the cassette or the lid, that means you are putting something over there, and both are inanimate things, and unlike unlike apple and cup, there is no edibility, inedibility difference here. So, it is something like keeping the Lego pieces, keeping the earplugs, fitting a ring. So, all of them, they would have the similar kind of semantic relation, which is why the same verb can be used. My suggestion for you would be, why do not you just go back and check the book? There is a wonderful picture to give you the 4 different actions in Korean, how it is different, and what sort of challenges does it pose for the child to acquire this. Okay? Yeah. Let us compare the two verbs Korean and English, and we will try to find out what sort of typological generalization can be drawn, and whether there has been any similarity between these two, or there have been so much of difference that it is difficult for us to put them together. In case of English, what happens, a child who is acquiring English, she does not have to struggle much for the different types of verbs which are used with different spatial relation mentioning words, something like in and into or in or on, and just we saw that when you say putting an apple into the bowl and putting a cup on the table, the verbs are also different in Korean, not in English. However, what is the similarity between Korean and English? If there are objects like a pin or a cassette or a lid or a ring, so these kind of things, when semantically they are closer with each other, then there is no problem using the same verb for all these objects, right. So, what should be our take home, or what should we think, what kind of generalization should we draw if we approach it from the typological perspective, right. So, what happens in English, conveying the idea of location or the space, whether there has been a close fit between the two objects or not does not really matter. The verb put can be used with any of the object, right. So, put in, put on, put into, put beside, so all sort of things can be used, and there has been no change in verb, but in Korean the distinction between the loose connection and close fit. So, apple and cup, there is a loose connection between two, and what kind of connection? Semantic connection. But lid and a cassette, there is a close fit. So, when the connection is loose, the verbs could be different. When there is a close fit between the semantic representation, then the verbs need not be different. It is only the spatial indication or spatially indicating preposition or postposition can take care of the thing, right. So, what shows, what kind of generalization does it have? It shows languages differ not that much in what they can express, but in what they must express. So, if they must express a certain things, there the languages are different. But if you ask me what is the ability or what can the languages express, in that case there has not been much difference. Languages are generally similar if they express the spatial relation. But what is that must thing? The must thing here is the loose connection versus close fit. If it is a close fit, there is no problem with the verbs. The same verb can be used, but if it is a loose connection, Korean is going to behave differently from English. So, because like if it is a close fit, both Korean and English, they are going to behave similar manner, space referring words are concerned.